Welcome, everyone. We are really thrilled to have you join us for this live TEC Canada industry panel, Navigating Tariff Risks. My name is Colton Esser, and I am the Manager of Strategy and Research here at TEC Canada. As we all know, Canada's economy has been thrown into a place of uncertainty with President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canada. So today's industry panel will dive into thought-provoking insights and actionable strategies for mitigating risks, optimizing operations, and developing practical approaches to protect and grow your business in a shifting trade environment. So we'll start today's session with 3 or 4 questions for the panelists to answer, and then we will spend the rest of the session where we'll open it up to questions from our audience for the remainder. So please remember to post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we will do our best to get through as many as we can in this session. So with that, I'm really pleased to give a brief introduction to each of our 3 panelists. And today we have Craig Radford, Johnny Rungtusanatham, and Patrick Riley. Sorry, Johnny, if I sort of butchered your last name there, but just a really quick bio into each of them. So for Craig is a bootstrapped entrepreneur who built Wizmo, a logistics business specializing in moving small packages through alternative delivery networks. By integrating regional final mile delivery services with private air and ground consolidations, Wizmo provides a turnkey solution for cost savings and enhanced package performance, as well as IT and custom support for large retailers and fulfillment centers across the US and Canada. Handling over 5 million plus packages annually to the United States, Craig is able to offer sharp insights into pending tariff changes, cross-border trade dynamics, and the evolving landscape of pending change. Johnny is an Ohio eminent scholar and professor in the Department of Operations, Business Analytics, and Information Systems at the Lindner College of Business of the University of Cincinnati. He joined the Lindner College of Business after spending 4 years as the Canada Research Chair in Supply Chain Management at the Schulich School of Business, York University. He's an awards-winning researcher and educator, recognized as one of the top 50 authors of operations management research and of supply chain management research, and one of the top contributors to the field of operations management. Patrick Riley is responsible for US, Canada, and UK e-commerce growth among foreign consolidators, marketplaces, and platforms, including the development of unique cross-border solutions, and for managing partnerships that help support the North American e-commerce network. Patrick joined Livingston in September 2021, bringing 18 years of experience and particular expertise in SaaS, global transportation networks, and supply chain optimization. His previous roles include consultant and managing partner at Forward Unlimited, senior account manager at CSX Intermodal, and VP of sales at Unishippers. And Patrick is also a member of the Virginia Maritime Association and the National Defense Transportation Association, and holds a BS in International Marketing and Economics from Virginia Commonwealth University. All right, there we go. So let's jump into our first question of the day. So just to kind of lay the foundation for our discussion today, I'd like to ask each panelist, where are we at today? Can you give a bit of a brief overview of, the current events to date that have led to the situation we're in facing these tariffs? What were some of the pivotal moments along the way? Maybe, Craig, we can start with you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. In my sort of opinion, I think that this has actually a lot to do with potentially other nations and the trade negotiations that are going on with perhaps Mexico and China. Some of the more acute issues that he's having with unfair trade, and that we're maybe being pulled into this somewhat as a bit of a game of 4D chess, where it's like, look how I'm treating Canada. I think a lot of the trade is fairly balanced and really well integrated between the two countries, but there is a big deficit. But a lot of it is energy, like our crude oil exports. Um, Another area, and this is really my area, where there's a bit of an imbalance in trade between the countries, is I do small packages. Basically, 70-80% of our volume is small packages from Canada into the United States. We can actually move them there duty and tax free under their de minimis. clause where, it allows things that are small value to travel in, duty and tax free. Whereas on the other end, if an American wants to sell something in Canada, it's 40 and 150. So it's like $40 is de minimis and 150 is, you start to pay duties and taxes at 150. And so it's very lopsided. There are some things that aren't fair. And I think, yeah, again, political posturing may have something to do with it. I'll keep it to that.
Excellent. Thank you. Johnny or Patrick, do you guys want to jump in and add anything? Any more color?
Yeah, I can do that. As you to allude to what Craig's talking about, you're exactly right, right? It's a lot of political posturing with how we're looking at it today. Um, there is some unfair trade around the world coming into the United States from obvious parties, and so a lot of it is, essentially the administration coming in is looking at where can we kind of add some extra heat to make things happen for America, right? And it's good or bad, right? So we're already seeing Mexico make some changes to kind of be in preparation for this. And where's Canada coming in? The nice thing is, as Craig said, the de minimis is not going to change. It's not going to go to, $100 tomorrow to match Canada. I think that's going to stay, but it's going to make it more difficult to do trade in and out between US and America. But coming into Canada, or going into the US from Canada for those formal goods coming in that over $800, is it going to make it more difficult? I think a lot of this is going to subside. It's not going to be as bad as we're looking at, but it's really going to be based on, what's the reaction? Because obviously America doesn't want to see these, the energy, right? There's a lot of energy coming specifically out of Ontario, into the Northeast that I don't think America wants to see change.
Let me add a couple points to what Greg and Patrick, pointed out. It is very clear that Canada is being caught up in one big swoop. Okay, partly because Canada does actually have a trade surplus with the U.S. Um, Canada, the U.S. actually imports a lot of goods from Canada, from energy to medical equipment to auto parts to food, like agricultural products. So a 25% threat could be a signaling from the incoming administration's perspective to, potentially less friendly countries that if I can do this to a friendly, neighbor, guess what I can do to you others who are not as friendly if you don't, you know, comply with what we want. Now, of course, the incoming administration also wants Canada to act on, increasing military spending and contributing to, the international global security scenarios, as well as, strengthening the border. So all this could be posturing, but at the same time, I do believe that on day one, that there will be some uh, stronger signaling, including potential executive orders that start levying these tariffs. But there's good news in the sense that those tariffs, even if it's an executive order, it's not going to be implemented right away. There's time from when when the president signs the executive order to when it actually starts taking effect, and that window perhaps allow for some cooler heads and some mitigation approaches to be thought through.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. So, kind of following on the heels of that, what do you see as the most immediate risks Canadian businesses face if the proposed U.S. tariffs are implemented? And maybe what are some things that they can do to prepare proactively for that actuality?
Yeah, I mean, one that's sort of just obvious for me, and I'll try and speak to my actual scenario just to make it a little more realistic. But the basic crux of the issue is that, let's say you have a fulfillment center doing e-commerce, shipping from Canada to the United States. You're having to export into the States at the value of the sale of the goods. So, like, let's say you buy something for $50 and you sell it for 100. Now I'm paying duties on it, $100, where if the cost of goods is 50 and I just brought it into a warehouse for distribution from wherever it is in the world, Vietnam or China or whatever, into the States, then you're just paying tariffs on the cost of goods. So, like, the crux of the issue is that, in a lot of ways, is that, now you have domestic competition that has an advantage over you.
So breaking it down into simplism, I actually don't see an immediate issue for Canadian exporters because any tariffs that's going to be levied will be, unless there's a negotiation between the seller and the buyer, it's being paid by the buyer, right? So U.S. companies and U.S. consumers are going to pay for the increased price of the based on the tariffs. The real question for U.S. exporters is that going to depress the demand for the goods, which then has a spillover effect in terms of production curbs, then worker hours being cut back and so forth. That's for what I would call goods that are not essential to U.S. social welfare. But if you look at the type of goods actually being being traded between the U.S. and Canada, Canada supports a large portion of the energy usage in the U.S. If you think of food, pork, live hogs, huge market. You know, Canada actually supplies a lot of that, 5 million, I think, last year, individual piece into the U.S. market. And then auto parts that actually have not necessarily true, U.S. versus Canada origin, but maybe crossing the border multiple times as it's being used in different parts of the system, right? So prices are going to go up. Whether prices translate into lower demand and then subsequently societal pressures on Canadian, is the real issue, right? And on that point, I think one of the things I would like to emphasize is that it's for the Canadian governments not to overreact, right? Partly because we may feel some pain for 4 years, but the pain, I think, will be largely borne on the U.S. side when consumers realize that what they're buying is no longer, as inexpensive because of the 25% tariff that's been implemented. Of course, whether it's 25 or not remains to be seen.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that as well. So Johnny talked about, this period, let's say it's day one next Tuesday, the administration comes in, makes all these changes and says, this is what's going to happen. They're executive orders. You're looking at a minimum of 60 days, right? So from my stance, become good friends, build that partnership with your customs broker because they're going to be the one to lead you to find solutions to make better choices, whether it's looking at tariff engineering, making sure that those tariffs coming properly into Canada, and then how do you get them to the US? There's multiple avenues to bring products in, whether it's B2B, direct to consumer. There's a lot of different avenues and different ways you can do it to make sense of it, to help, make it not as much of an impact. Again, you'll have time to think about this and will it go into effect? Again, in my opinion, a trade war with Canada is a trade war with Europe. It's a trade war with the UK, right? And that's not something anybody on the global landscape wants to see. So I don't think it's going to be fast. I don't think it's going to be as bad, but I think it is a lot of political posturing based on what's happening elsewhere. But that said, there are avenues if something goes into place, it doesn't make sense because ultimately it is the consumer that pays for it, right? So if you change your price by 25%, right? So for every dollar in, it's an extra 25 cents on top of that. It's going to get expensive. And so the U.S. will end up paying the unfortunate side of that. Thankfully, there's a Canadian, there's a 30% difference between the U.S. and Canadian dollars that does help, but still doesn't really make it, softer at that point. But I think we just need to be cognizant about how we're doing business, making sure that we're ahead of it and you're making good choices with who your customs broker is. If your customs broker calls you on next Wednesday and says, "Oh my gosh, this is happening," remember, cooler heads will prevail. So keep on to that.
Excellent. Thank you all for your input on that. The third question I'm going to bring up here, following off of that topic, is around competitiveness. So any thoughts or strategies for owners and leaders of SMEs who are trying to, they might be facing the issue of, maintaining or achieving competitiveness in light of proposed tariffs? Any thoughts on that?
There's 3 possible mechanisms right now, like you said, actually correctly point out that we still have about 60 days if, in fact, the tariffs are going to be left, right? Figure out a way to move as much of whatever you're selling to the U.S. market into the U.S. now, right? And if that means consolidating orders and expected orders in the next 30, 60 days, even if we have 90 days across all your customers in the U.S. so that you actually have those products in the US before the tariffs happen. Okay, that will help buffer the pricing for your customers. And this is where working with logistics companies and brokerage firms that may have facilities to actually store that would be helpful. Working with your customers and see if they're willing to have products already there be moved to different customers at different points in time, create some flexibility for your customers right now. In other words, the more you're willing to work with your customers who are ultimately going to be payable. I know there's a comment in the chat box that maybe exporters, directors are responsible for tariffs. That remains to be seen, but we'll get to that in a second. As long as you Canadian companies are willing to work with US customers to help them buffer some of that price increase, okay, the more likely then you can work together to look at longer term solutions. Last but not least, and this gets to the point about being the importer record, even though you're the exporters, on the US side, if you're selling to them something that's critical, they're going to definitely likely to work with you because they cannot be out of that critical part or critical product, right? Now, for consumer products that are discretionary in nature, probably not as much wiggle room, and they'll probably have to look at different solutions. But as I look at industrial products, energy, food, I'm not so sure that you need to be afraid of the tariffs unless you decide not to help the US customers, absorb some of that shock in the tariff. Point number one. Point number two, I'm not so sure that the 25% would actually apply to some of these goods that actually are necessary for society to function in the US. And in many ways, would hurt the supporters that have brought, the next administration back to power. So.
Yeah,
It might be worth talking about as well, when you referred to you're the exporter and you're also the importer of record. Pretty sure I know what you're getting at there because it's like a B2B to C move for us. That's how we've positioned it as. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. I know Livingston knows about it, but the idea of selling to your sister company in the United States from your Canadian company at a few points above cost of goods, you'll have to kind of assess it with an inventory account based on commodity and industry and historical margins that you've had and stuff like that. Some people are pretty bold. They're going to do like 1 or 2%. And I don't know what to say, about that, but it is an interesting, method. And I know, for instance, like a lot of the parcels that come from China into Canada, they do that. They sell it to their Canadian entity, even though it's like Temu or Shein or whatever, and everything's $40. And, um, so I think that's an interesting one to maybe talk about because not everyone knows about that.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Craig. Valuation is very, very important at this point, right? So it does involve having some good forensic accounting in there to make sure you're making a good choice, because 1 and 2% might make sense for certain businesses, but if you're a t-shirt manufacturing or working off of 1 or 2%, it's going to be a red flag, and it's not CBP coming after you; it's the IRS, right? It's Department of Commerce at this point, where it's much larger fines and fines that will haunt you for years, right? It'll make importing into the US very difficult. So you want to make sure that valuations make sense in the eyes of everyone looking at this, because it gets costly if it gets involved. Again, back to making sure good relationship with your customs broker and obviously your accountant at this point.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, guys. And one sort of clarifying question that has come through in the chat is why 60 days? We've talked about this buffer of at least 60 days. So maybe just providing a little bit of insight into where that timeline comes from.
Sure, I can add right into that. So that 60 days, sometimes can be longer. That's really for Congress to make the decision, right? So, presidents can declare a lot of things. Those executive orders go into action pretty quickly, but you have to have consensus from both sides of the aisle. And that's really important. And granted, a lot of these, I know de minimis is a big hot topic in the United States today. There's an article that came out on the 13th about that. But again, that goes to the same waiting period. And even though that has bipartisan support of focusing on certain kinds of imports and types of items that are coming in that are unrestricted into the US, the same goes to if we're going to, set large tariffs for other organizations, other countries, then we need to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned with that. And so 60 days is really for the cooling period, I think, as Johnny called it, to make sure that everybody's making the right decision. Let's make sure this is not a big jump, and let's move, right? And it also allows this process to go into place So that way it's not just turned on tomorrow and all of a sudden there's stuff stuck at the border because there's these massive tariffs and credits not aligned, etc. So there's a lot of things that go into play with that. But yeah, 60 days is kind of the minimum to allow everyone to make decisions and it to physically become law.
And to add to Patrick's point, like the 60 days, because 30 days is pretty much firm, because an executive order, you know, only takes effect 30 days after it's been entered in what's called the Federal Register. So, just because incoming president signs an executive order, that doesn't take effect unless it's actually recorded in the Federal Register. And then 30 days from that point is when it actually has to be implemented, right? So that's why I said, if you look at a timeline, 60 days is a good sort of a benchmark, because you never know how Congress works and how documents get, put into place. And so we do have a little time. And this is where I said, this will be a time to actually gauge a little bit of reaction, right? Aluminum is actually heavily used. How comes out of Canada do? Well, companies need aluminum. What are they going to do? They have no choice but to continue to buy. And this is where, going back to what Patrick and Craig, we all said, right? Helping your customers understand how to buffer that price increase with a tariff will be a good neighborly signal, if nothing else, but also long-term continuation of business after, right? The administration changes over to another more friendly administration if allowed.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for sorry, was there another?
I was
Craig,
just going to say, I've heard in the last week or so, especially because of the concerns with inflation and how they tie to 10-year treasuries, and then how that affects narratives for like the stock market rally and tech and whatnot. And then you saw this morning that the CPI numbers came out, and the market did really well. It's pretty. He's sensitive to how all that works, and I believe some people close to him, like there's a really smart guy named Howard Lutnick, sort of like a Wall Street guy, but he's Commerce Secretary. And yeah, I think there's talk now about phased in tariffs, because they don't want to just break the back of like a frothy tech rally or whatever. It's like they, want to bring it in slow. And, maybe we see something where it's like the idea is that it's something phased in 2% a month or something like that, right? That's what I heard earlier this week. Again, that's if it happens. On that note of the Howard Lutnick guy, I'll leave a link here prior, but he gave out a lot of information about their strategy, what their strategy will be for trade negotiation, in a podcast and an interview um, that you can just go online and look. And he's kind of spilling the beans a bit, but he basically says they're not going to tax things that they don't make, and that they will bluff and suggest there's blanket tariffs. But there won't actually be. And it's kind of crazy to listen to it. You almost think they made him stop doing interviews or podcasts at a certain point, but it might make you feel better about the likelihood of a blanket tariff being maybe lower than how we feel right now.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks, Craig, for that. And I might grab that link from you following the session, and we'll include that in our distribution following this with the session that's recorded. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for that that insight. Just the last question here to tie it off before we move into the open Q&A, and we'll start taking those questions that are coming in, I see in the chat. What are some overlooked opportunities that businesses could explore to turn some of the tariff-related challenges perhaps into strategic advantages, if there is any?
So yeah, I'll kick that off. So as Craig has spoken a couple times about, I've talked a little bit about direct to consumer. If you're not doing direct to consumer specifically using Canada, now is a great time, more so than ever. Earlier in the latter part of last year, the 20th, IMAX for apparel and textile is essentially over for the next 2 years. So there's a lot of businesses now focused on how can I have IMAX duplicated elsewhere, and that's Canada. So there are solutions in Canada where you can import free or duty free, and then bring it down into the States, obviously under the $800 de minimis, and you're essentially duty free, whether it be from China or anywhere else. So there are options like that. So if you're not doing direct to consumer and you've got a product that makes sense, you can put it on a Shopify website or Amazon or whatever. You can do direct to consumer, and companies like Craig's can make that happen.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's definitely that could end up big upside for Canada. I was really worried, and now maybe it's good. But Mexico was the only other place you could do the Section 321 for low value entry for parcels and whatnot. And 30 of the top 100 e-commerce brands were out of Mexico, and then Mexico stopped doing duty drawbacks, so that they're not basically going to allow it to be a market that will participate in this Section 321 thing, which now it just leaves Canada. So now like apparently all of the 3PLs are getting tons of calls from brands being like, "You it's the last safe haven for Section 321 for e-commerce parcels," and maybe it could be positive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other upsides?
Yeah. Anyone else? Any other insight into that?
We're just taking it as a chance to expand our business to the US a little bit more, because if anything, this has taught me that I don't like being at the behest of the border as much as I am. So, doing more international inbound from Asia and UK and US into Canada, as well as US to US. Like a lot of our products work just as well for Americans as they do for Canadians. So it's very uncomfortable. I don't like moving this quick, but we're changing a lot of things so that we can service those markets. And maybe we'll look back in a few years and say, "Oh, I'm so glad we did this." Earlier on when we were forced to do it. So I'm trying to see the silver linings in it, and I'm sure there's a few more.
Yeah, and I think you look at any market where it's an English speaking country. If you're doing business in Canada today, you're doing business in the US. What other markets are English speaking? So you look at UK, you look at Australia. Those are easy markets to ship your products into, import into. Um, you know, Logistics looks and feels the same. It's just they have a better accent than the American, right? So, um, very easy to do business, and those are great avenues to find strategies in new markets. So when you see the adversity, that's time to grow and expand.
Yeah. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. We're going to open up the floor now, and we have a lot of questions coming through here. The first one that came in earlier in the conversation, and I think you've all probably touched on it to a certain degree, but we'll just put it out in case there's any additional thoughts. Is just around the nature of is this a scare tactic? Is it something that we actually expect to come through? And then maybe perhaps what we could build on is if you have a thought, what would be the areas that you do expect to see the tariffs come through the strongest on?
So yeah, I think there's some hot air, obviously, right? And I think we've all, Johnny Craig have both kind of said the same thing, right? It's politically posturing. So is it a scare tactic? Yes. Nobody wants a war with Canada or the European Union or the UK, right? Because it's kind of all in the same different countries, but kind of linked in the same way. I think if you're going to see changes, you start look at what is in place today, right? Look at your Section 301 tariffs that are in place today. Those are easy avenues to start enforcing tariffs. Like North Korea, right? That's a country we don't want to do business with, right? So those areas where there's already specific countries or specific items that are made in those countries, like steel, if it's something the U.S. produces today, it's going to probably be tariffed really quickly, right? Those are easy actions. If it's something we don't make, if it's a country we want to do business with, I see that being a harder avenue to get pushed through and approved.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it may just be an eye for an eye thing where they just want equal treatment on stuff like that. Howard Lutnick interview I was talking about, he was mentioning selling cars to Europe where they have 100% tariff. You can't sell a car to Europe if you wanted to. And then he also mentioned furniture, I guess, because it's bulky and it's something that could be made in the States. I had heard that there was a Washington Post article where there was a leak, and sometimes these leaks are real because he's fractured some of his own cabinet, and in terms of them being in unison with some of the rhetoric, and it was suggesting like defense contracts, weapons building, that kind of thing, as well as energy and minerals. But yeah, I don't know, John, if you have an idea of where he scores points, but like what's the end game here on like what commodity? Because I don't know, you said just like automotive and energy, there's a little bit of minerals.
So a lot of energy, critical minerals, agricultural products, things that we need in the US, right? Now, do I see the incoming administration, going as far as just to a blanket exec order on everything just to shock the system? I wouldn't pass it. I wouldn't say that this might not happen. I think it might be done just as a way to stop a negotiation on, more specific, categories of goods, right? Um, but I'll come back to however this happens, okay? It's very well be posturing, and it might not be as long-lived or sustainable, okay, as we all are concerned about. Because ultimately, when the U.S. consumer, you know, finds that things are a lot more expensive than before, this administration, this will shift and change the dialogue and conversations very quickly. Right? Um,
Yeah.
Oil and gas, or the price of oil was one of the major, dissatisfaction points for the outgoing administration, and we can easily see what's going to happen. Okay, if in fact, tariffs actually levied on energy product imports. So,
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we'll jump into the next question here. An interesting one coming from Jody Abbott. So, she talked about how they import goods into Canada from many countries and then ship them to the U.S. So, do you guys have any awareness of, will the increased tariffs apply to all goods shipped from Canada, regardless of the country of origin? Or is it only goods made in Canada? Like, what's sort of the nature of that?
I don't think we have any preview at this point. So,
Yeah.
I mean, but it goes at the origin of manufacture of the goods. Like, it doesn't really matter that it transits through Canada, from what I understand. I mean, as a customs broker, isn't that what you would say? But
Yes and no to that. So yeah, I'll add to that. If something is under a free trade agreement today with the United States and it stops and it's not sold, it sits in Canada, it gets fulfilled from Canada, it does lose its country of origin status, right? So much like CETA in Canada, which is the Central European Trade Association, if those products were to go to the United States and then, I want to go now fulfill out of Canada, they lose their CETA status with Canada. The same would apply for in the US, or such as something that Korea is not a really good solution because there's a free trade agreement between both countries in Canada and the US. But if something is a free trade agreement with the United States, but then goes to Canada, it may not apply when it comes back. So other way around, right? So it just depends on where it is. But yeah, if it typically is stopped and is destined, so it's moving through as an immediate export, then yeah, it'll apply. If it's going to be fulfilled or stopped there or be processed further, then yeah, it's going to probably lose its origin status if it's under a free trade agreement.
well, an interesting maybe one on that. I had a customer who brings something in from China. It's like a small widget sort of thing, very inexpensive, sort of like a phone case. But they do some reworking of it in Canada, and he's sort of arguing that actually by the rules, because of the maybe you'd notice, like, there's content rules based on price, unit cost of, like, the value add you've put in, and that some things can become Canadian even though they're straight up from China, just from the handling.
You're exactly right. We run into this all the time with kitting as well. It's the same thing, right? There's got multiple items. You've got a wallet that might be leather out of United States, but you've got a mug that's from Yeti that's made in another country that's not be us, right? So therefore, it loses its status. So what duty do you apply to this kitting process? And it's a blended. And same thing, you can change country of origin. That again kind of goes into Canadian consulting, U.S. consulting, where you can get those items changed to fit under USMCA or what the current status of USMCA is. I know that's up for discussion the end of this year. But
Tariff engineering, I guess, or what you referred to it earlier.
yep, that tariff engineering, it's a lovely word, and it does work. There's a lot of massive brands. There's reasons why you have zippers and unknown spots on a specific branded jacket out there that those things happen on purpose to help lower duty. I mean, the difference of 19% down to 8% sometimes, or even lower.
Here we go. Like, a lot of questions come in.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll move on to the next one here. Maybe really quick comments about services. So, there's a question here about, we export services to the US, usually performed in Canada, but sold in America. So, any thoughts on the tariff implications of that?
I don't know if we know. Do we only know about hard goods over here? I know that we have a deficit with them on services because you're using, like, Windows or Gmail or whatever. So, like, we're paying all these subscriptions and stuff. There's, like, that's working very well for the States, from what I understand.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Johnny, Patrick?
The
only thing I heard that digital goods are not part of the conversation, and I don't know whether you would think of digital goods as, part of a service bundle. But to actually put a tariff on the actual service, it's hard for me to comprehend at least, unless we know especially what kind of service. But even then, not sure how to actually put a value on that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Fair comment. Okay. Excellent. We'll move on to the next one. So this is a little bit more about staying in the loop. So what technology or tools have you guys found to be most effective for helping you and your business, let's say, stay informed, manage compliance, quickly adapt to shifts in trade policies? Craig, maybe we could start with you because I know this is something that you're pretty actively involved in.
Just scraping the web. Somehow I'm good at it, I think. So yeah, I do the Google alerts based on different text prompts. So like de minimis or whatever, I would put in there, put the word tariffs in or whatever, and just give you the newspaper articles that are relevant. And now that ChatGPT is relevant within the day, like basically it's live now, live time. You can ask it questions about what happened today or like what happened last week, and it will actually give you like a very nice summary and links to anything. So I found, of course, like just for any activity, ChatGPT wins an award for being effective. And then I also found a lot of luck on LinkedIn with people from the Customs and Border Patrol. For whatever reason, they think it's cool to be on LinkedIn, and I was able to get ahead of the CBP, like the director of CBP, talking to me back and forth, one email or one message on LinkedIn, and then she said, "Let's take it to email." And there's been multiple people like that where I've established some relationships at the border that way, and for whatever reason, that's worked for me. So
Excellent. Thanks, Craig. Patrick, Johnny, any go-to tools, processes, or anything like that to stay in the loop on tariffs and the evolving situation?
Yeah, so we're pretty large, right? We're the largest customs broker in North America. So we actually have a team. I receive more than one email a day of regulatory news from both Canada and the US. I also receive Europe and UK, Mexico, right? But we have a team that's sitting there scouring, talking to representatives that are making these decisions. So we're getting this in real time. So it sounds kind of old school in the fact that we actually have people that are physically pulling us, not just pulling it from the web, but they're getting it directly from the source. So it is vetted, it's real. We send these newsletters out on a fairly regular basis to our clients and partners to let them know what's going on. But yeah, we get that. Obviously, there's other third parties like Seeking Alpha. Craig's right. LinkedIn it's like what's happening right now, right? So you're getting kind of real time feedback, right or wrong, almost like some of the other social media out there. But at least you're finding out what people are talking about, and you logically go back and vet it, make sure it's true.
yeah, we were part of a trade organization for parcels in the United States, even though we're Canadian, and we just messaged the chair of that and said, "This is our situation. We want someone to help us." And then they found someone who was actually one of our vendors, but they're a very large Canadian company compared to us, and they have lobbyists in Washington, like in and around this issue. And then I was able to get set up with a call with that person. He used to be a port director, and I was able to get inside details on newspaper articles that came out 2 or 3 days after I had discussions where they were telling me things that was like, "Don't say you heard it from me," kind of thing, but this is probably what you're going to see. And then it all ends up being true. So there's these lobbyists that seem to have a lot of understanding of the what's going to go down before it goes down. So,
someone approached this question a little differently from the lots and lots of, let's say, aggregators, so, news, information, blogs, and so forth, right? And you're running a business, you're not going to have time to be inundated with all these pings and alerts all the time. Now, this is where, to Patrick's point, you know, as you grow your business, you do need to have market intelligence. And do you have a person? And I'll often call it as the person who does nothing but read and then brings interesting uh, uh, cases or issues to your attention, and then going on the electronic commerce website to just figure out what they're talking about may actually bring information directly from the horse's mouth. It could be something that may not happen just 6 months from now, but at least you're aware of it 6 months earlier, right? So it's not just being alert and being inundated with alerts, but having the capability to actually separate the noise from the true signal, and that takes more than just a tool, right? That's that, and we'll get to the point where AI may be that for you, but until then, Think about, do you actually have someone whose only job is to tell you on a daily basis, this is what I read yesterday, this may be relevant, not relevant. You're the CEO, you got to think about it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
There
go
was
ahead.
one other quick one was we sorry. What did we do? Oh, never mind. I've lost my train of thought. Go ahead. Maybe I'll remember later on.
No worries, Craig. And thank you guys for that one. Yeah, got lots of different sources. And then, Johnny, I really appreciate the extra context there on filtering out the signal from the noise as well. Next question here is so, how do you feel if these proposed tariffs are applied? How will this affect the U.S. leadership role in global economics? So, this is a bit more of sort of a macro question. But will this sort of erode any gained trust in global free market leadership? And what might be some of the consequences of that?
In the short term, everybody loses. Okay? But this is where, given the way the U.S. government is structured, and we're gonna have a new president 4 years afterwards. Okay, it's a question of how much can be done, how much damage will be done in 4 years, and how much time it would take after that to rebuild some of the relationships. Now, a point I've made when I do a lot of webinars on supply disruption is that you have to manage for the long term and not just for the short period of time. And whatever you do, just go back to, let's not overreact, because right now it's still pretty fuzzy and hazy as to what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And so the worst thing to do is actually engage in some of the conversations that's going on right now. I know Canada sent the provincial leaders to talk to, incoming President Trump, and they're getting different perspectives. Trudeau is talking to Trump, and they're all talking about, this is what we're going to do. We're going to retaliate. I mean, this may just be contributing to the narrative as opposed to waiting. Let's just wait and see what actually happens. In the meantime, what can we do as a business to actually act quickly? If in fact the 25% is reality, and if it's not, what else can we do to make sure that the relations that we are building with customers in the US actually stay strong, irrespective of whether it's 25%, 0%, minus 25%, let's put it that way, negative tariff, right? So I think that's a very important way to think about this issue, and not just be concerned about what's going to happen on January 20th, if in fact an executive order is signed, and then 30 days after it's entered into federal register, it takes effect. So
Yeah, excellent. All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next question here. I'm going to kind of combine two because we're getting a few industry-specific questions, or I guess I should say import expert-specific questions. So we have a question here on lumber markets. So in particular, softwood and manufactured products, what you might see the impacts being on that, as well as steel raw materials that are not available from mills in Canada. So any thoughts on exemptions or the potential hit of tariffs within those spaces?
Amazon number is going to create a huge escalated housing challenge in the US. And would there be an exemption? I would say, I hope so. Okay. But if it's actually used for furniture manufacturing, then it competes with what happens in the US. I think we might see, some levying of, additional government revenue, US government revenues on that itself. But just on the lumber itself, I think this is another product that's coming out of Canada that actually has a huge implication on the US economic situation. So
Excellent. Any other thoughts, Craig, Patrick?
Yeah, I can't speak to those two commodities, but for our industry, when we really wanted to know what was going to go on, and this is actually the thing I forgot from before, is we figured out what bills were in the Senate and the House over the last 5 years, where you could see some of the posturing of like what does the U.S. really want, because some things actually aren't fair, and they've already pointed it out a few times, and you could probably see the writing on the wall. Literally, you can find them on ChatGPT, the actual different bills and different stages. Um, there's some things aren't fair. I understand there was like the Marshall Plan after the war where they created a situation where the tariffs were like purposely unfair for the US so other nations could build themselves, and that basically none of it ever got walked back since 1947. And so whether it's special interest groups or whatever, like there probably is some leveling of the playing field that again short-term pain but might long-term be healthy for the US customers that we sell to. So, you know.
Excellent. Patrick, any thoughts on your end?
No, I can add a little bit to that, right? So lumber and steel are not my forte, but again, if you're importing this now into the U.S., I'd urge you to reach out directly to your market manager that's managing your brokerage today, right? They should have a specialized person within the group that can give you some really good insights of, hey, if what if happens, this is the reality of it, right? So I don't want to go in and go down a hole of like, this is what's going to happen with steel imports and lumber, right? I know a little bit, but I think it's really smart to reach out to those subject matter experts in that area and say, what's the impact to my business if this happens?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Patrick. So we have a question here that's proposing a bit of a situation that's addressing duty-free limits applying to kind of on a per invoice or per customer or per consolidation basis. So the example is that we ship our U.S. orders in consolidated shipments. There may be 20 invoices for 20 customers per consolidation. Does the $800 duty-free limit apply per invoice, per customer, or per consolidation? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can talk to that pretty easily. So it's based on constantly, right? So I can buy one thing from one marketplace, but there might be three invoices because it's multiple merchants, right? So it can be consolidated order of multiple merchants selling to me. So I could have three invoices at $200 each. That's $600. Obviously, I'm under the $800 de minimis. I qualify, right? So it is per consignee. So it's $800 per consignee per day,
Per day.
right? Per day, right? So that's the big thing, right? It's not. I could receive an order out of Canada that might be fulfilled by Nordstrom, and I could get something else that receives from Amazon that also comes out of Canada, and I could buy Craig's company's cell phone cases, right? Same thing. They come in, it's all under $800. I can get 6 packages in a day as long as it's all under $800. You typically are fine. But if they combine together, that's where customs is saying they eventually will be able to flag that. That'd probably be 6 months to a year down the road, though, before they have the technology. But it's there. It's just they can't quite implement it yet.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. Craig, Johnny, anything else on top of that, or is that pretty much all encompassing? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. We had a question come in through, and this is certainly outside of my realm of knowledge, but I'll throw it out there to see if you guys have any thoughts on this. You see business valuations attracting a larger EBITDA multiplier in both the USA and Canada. So is there any impact of the tariff situation on business valuations? Any thoughts?
It's gonna be a pass through, right? So, Chinese business gets taxed more, they're going to charge more, right? So, it's a complete pass through. The U.S. consumer purchases it and pays more, right? No longer if my t-shirt $10, it's now $12.50 maybe, or whatever it's going to be, right? So those sorts of items are gonna go up in price based on whatever the tariff is. So I think it's a true pass through. It might look like there's more money and more revenue running around, but there's the cost is going against it. So I don't see the EBITDA being affected.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. Another question here. As we're approaching the 10-minute mark left in our conversation, and we'll just try and blast through a couple others. So how can businesses assess the risk of retaliatory tariffs? Will these occur? What might be some of the cascading effects? How do you see, Canada's response in this impacting the SME community?
I'll leave it with the Canadians. But I preach patience, and I said retaliation, conversation, dialogue right now is actually going to worsen any posturing. And if indeed what I believe is that U.S. consumers are going to be the ones that are most immediately affected by any tariffs. Okay, and only affects Canada only to extend that lowers the demand because you're not able to find replacement of the loss of demand and then job losses. Right. So until that happens, I actually think any type of retaliation really doesn't help cool things now. I think more important is to really emphasize the tight supply chain connections between U.S. and Canadian firms and how challenging and how expensive it is to actually implement straight across the board tariffs on goods coming out of Canada. It's not that simple for a lot of reasons that I think the audience has pointed out. What if actually started in the US, got a value add in Canada, got shipped back to the US, and none of these are actually worked out yet in all this broad, posturing conversations by the incoming administration. Until we know better, this may just be, again, forcing everybody to the negotiating table to talk about other more important issues including military spending increases by Canadian government and border control and so forth. So
Excellent. Thanks, Johnny. Any additional insight, Craig or Patrick? Oh, we'll leave it at that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. I mean, we've heard some retaliation tactics from even the motor carriers moving stuff over the border. Craig knows this all too well, that we've heard from vendors that are saying that if the tariffs go into place, they're going to increase the fuel surcharges to an obscene amount compared to what it is intra Canada. So that's kind of a scary tactic. And of course, Ontario's trying to cut off power to the Northeast, right? These are hopefully hot air, right? That would be just horrific if that truly were to come to fruition. But even with the fuel surcharge, which a lot of the general public doesn't see this, but business owners, importers definitely understand how important those fuel surcharges are. And if they go from 24% to 54% overnight, that would be catastrophic for pricing.
Yeah. I think culturally, we don't do well as like Canadians don't do well with this style of negotiation. I don't know if they've really seen this before. So it's like we're probably taking everybody at their word. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's smart or not. Maybe a good question for Johnny, but how trade wars do start, right? So maybe there's been a historical examples you've studied, Johnny, that you don't want to stay. You want to stay away from that. I don't know if that makes sense for us or not.
Trade wars do start. Trade wars don't last. What's worse is, escalating dialogues that actually make things worse. Right?
You Twitter and stuff.
Tit for tat doesn't always, it may not be the best, response to a negotiation. So that's all.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you guys for that. Just thinking long term, long term implications of this, and that's under a big assumption that we see a sustained elevated level of tariffs on and a strained relationship, let's say, between the U.S. and Canada in their trade relationship. Should businesses be exploring? What does the assessment look like of maybe reshoring supply chains, moving things back home? Shifting the trajectory of how supply chains look. Like, is that considerations that should be top of mind? Is it still early days? Is there any thoughts on that element?
People are going to Vietnam from China, right? Because China's a bit of an egg on a plate for being attacked. I know it is for the parcels. Everyone's going to Vietnam, so I imagine that makes sense on formal entry trade as well. But
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about what's going on in Mexico, and we're talking to a lot of big brands more so than usual, right? A lot of times I'm focused more with the 3PL side or even the platform, but in talking to these brands, a lot of them have already started switching. Even Temu and Shein are looking at, Chinese-based businesses are looking to make their stuff, as Craig said, in Vietnam, or already have those widgets being manufactured there to get away from China. China is definitely a target for the U.S. I think if we're going to see large tariff, it's going to be focused on specific Asian countries. I know Trump has mentioned India, he's mentioned Vietnam, he's mentioned obviously China many times. So I think you're looking at where you're sourcing your products, how can you comply, focused on maybe working within a free trade agreement within Canada, so you can make it easier to import it into Canada. So that way that duty is lesser. One of those is or CPTPP, which is part of the Asian Pacific APAC agreement with Canada. But Vietnam's not part, or Vietnam is part of it, but Taiwan is not, right? China's obviously not, right? So where are those items sourced? And if you're making apparel, where's the yarn coming from, right? If the yarn's coming out of China, if it's coming out of Taiwan, that might not be the best thing, right? Because Vietnam doesn't grow a lot of certain elements that go into making clothing or apparel or textiles. So starting to look at where you're sourcing those items might help to get you into one of those free trade agreements.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. And one of the last questions maybe here that we'll explore before closing out the session, just had a comment come in. So from Dwayne, he said, he listened to another Zoom seminar from Global Affairs this morning. And they're talking about how tariffs could be implemented in days, not weeks. So this is potentially in contrast to the 60-day window that we've been discussing on this session. So I guess, the question being, is there a risk that these tariffs could be implemented earlier? And, is there anything that businesses can do to, mitigate that risk or at least respond appropriately?
So I talked a little about 301 tariffs. There's a whole list of these types of tariffs that are already in place, right? So if tomorrow, and I'm just going to pick on Canada since we're talking about it, right? If tomorrow we find out that it's decided by the U.S. that we think that Canada's funding a bad organization, or whatever, and all of a sudden Canada's flagged, then obviously it makes it very easy to move that within days or weeks. But to throw a blanket, as Johnny said, it's next to impossible without that waiting period, putting into the registrar, making sure that both sides of the aisle agree on it. Yes, there might be bipartisan support for certain items, but 25% across the globe is not something that has bipartisan support, right? It might be with just mainly the cabinet or even partially that cabinet. Nothing's, I don't think, going to happen in days or weeks, unless we're talking 12 weeks, right?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Patrick. Johnny, Craig, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's
Check cheat it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Craig.
No, I mean, I just asked this question to ChatGPT, and it looks like it can be done in days because of the Trade Expansion Act. It's giving you bad actor authority to impose tariffs, within days or immediately. But for the majority of things, there is a 60-day window. But it looks like there might be an angle for even sooner, but I just don't know why you'd do it. But yeah.
And this is the element of unknown about the incoming administration and the maverick nature of, and the willingness to basically go against, tradition and norms, right? But again, I think I like to emphasize that I think we're fixated on something that hasn't happened. I think we really need to be thinking more along the lines of, if it happens, what can we do right now versus on the day it happens versus 7 days after it happens, right? I think what is it that Canadian business can do? And, we talked about figuring out to get your goods into the US sooner than later, working with customers to see if their stockpile can be used in a manner that allows different customers to fulfill in a different way, working with, the logistics companies to actually manage goods in the US already, right? So there are things that companies can do now, and just fixating on a date and worrying about it doesn't change the fact that it's either going to happen or not, and the probability of that is 50% at this point. We don't know what it's going to be.
We had some people trying to bookmark in Buffalo dead storage, like really low cost bulk storage for this exact thing. And the folks in Buffalo warehouse we're talking to, like, we're getting a lot of these calls from Canadians and they all want space, but they don't want to send us our stuff. So yeah, people are doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, Craig, Johnny, and Patrick. Your invaluable insights and perspectives, we truly appreciate them. And I'm speaking on behalf here of everyone at the tech community. We're gonna bring this session to a close. But I just wanted to thank all of you, and as well as everyone who tuned in live for this TEC Canada industry panel. Your engagement not only helps us run sessions like this, but your questions also help other tech members, find takeaways that they may not have thought of before. So thank you again. For anyone who did miss this session, or if you'd ever like to go back and rewatch the great information that was shared by this panel, a recording of today's webinar will be shared in the member newsletter and the chair bulletin. So keep an eye out for that. And it might be a really great tool to take some notes on and bring to your next tech session to really workshop some of these ideas and actionable takeaways with your tech members and build that power of perspective. So with that, we here at TEC Canada wish everyone a great rest of the day. And once again, thank you guys so much, Patrick, Johnny, and Craig. We truly appreciate you taking the time to share your perspective today.
Thank you for having me. So.
Thank you.
Of course, thanks everyone.